Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 111. Zemo, Yelena, and Laura. It took less than 24 hours for the survivors of the Bavarian strike to reach Zemo's stronghold. One of the two were to require weeks or even months of physical recovery and rehab to get back on his feet. The other was going to need some very careful, very gentle handling. Whatever had happened in the Avengers' attack, the second survivor was right on the knife edge of going irrevocably insane over it. Zemo immediately had his best medical teams start working on both men. The mentally intact survivor got a few quiet words of encouragement, congratulations, and thanks. Such things cost Zemo literally nothing and would ensure the man at least thought well of him. Depending on just how bad the Von Struckers had been as bosses, it could earn him the man's undying loyalty. Certainly, being willing to shell out for the procedures and therapy necessary to get the man back to full working order would earn Zemo a lot of points with the man. All too often, such badly wounded minions were simply disposed of. Really, Zemo thought, his fellow Hydra officers were largely very dumb in their handling of their subordinates. And then Zemo got an unexpected windfall the evening of the day the two survivors arrived. To wit, Yelena Belova. A rather rough-looking Yelena at that. Clearly, she had been rather extensively punished for her failure to infiltrate Stark Tower and the loss of the asset. Again, Zemo's fellow officers were morons. Yelena might be wholly, unshakably loyal to Hydra, but even the most loyal soldier can and would revolt or simply refuse their duty if they are handled badly enough, often enough. Yelena hadn't been pushed to that point yet, but given who she was and what she was capable of, even thinking of pushing her that far was suicidally stupid. Zemo was not slow to comprehend the uses to which he could put Yelena, given his intention to implant X-23 into the Avengers. Yelena was a known enemy combatant. Having her hunting Laura would lend a very real-seeming layer of danger to Laura's cover of being hunted by inimical forces. It would also increase the likelihood of the Avengers pulling Laura into their midst, rather than suspecting her of something. Not to mention giving Yelena a chance at payback. All in all, quite the windfall. Zemo briefed and debriefed Yelena extensively. Thankfully, her training allowed her to recall everything in perfect detail and allowed her to notice more than the average person. It gave Zemo some much-needed intelligence as to what sort of defenses the tower had in place other than its residents. He was duly impressed with what Yelena had told him. The security guards had been apparently quite competent for their breed, if wholly unprepared for a Black Widow. And where there was one automated defense, there were bound to be more. At least in this case, Zemo didn't think his fellow officers stupid for deploying Yelena at all. There was literally no other way to discover what sort of defenses the tower had than to try to invade the place and see what happened. Stark, whatever else could be said about him, was not a stupid man, so there would not be any record, computerized or paper, of the tower's defenses for people to ferret out. Zemo also told Yelena what he had planned for Laura and his idea to include her in the scheme. Yelena, after a moment's surprise at being consulted, agreed it was as solid a plan as any. "You're going to have to be very careful about how she reports," Yelena said. "Defenses aside, Stark is a tech-head. He'll have that tower up to its eyeballs in prevention and detection tech. Calls or emails from the tower itself would be completely out." Zemo nodded, frowned. "That does not present a challenge. She can't report from there, and if they're protecting her from enemies, they're unlikely to let her wander the city alone. I have to think on a solution for that." Yelena did not quite know what to think. She'd failed. She deserved punishment for that. This she did not deny nor argue. She didn't even quibble at the severity of the punishment. Failure was unacceptable. But Zemo baffled her. He was unlike her previous superiors. He paid strict attention to and gave due credit to her opinions and observations during the debrief of her attempt to infiltrate the tower. And he had, shock of shocks, sought her opinion on the theatrics of deploying his personal trainee. Yelena had no idea as to the girl's abilities. She wasn't a widow. so she hadn't been able to comment on the feasibility of the girl holding her own if she was discovered. But even consulting Yelena as to the practicalities of the deployment of a fellow asset was unheard of. He was a lot more cautious and careful than what Yelena was used to. She did not, however, mistake this for cowardice. Far from it. Zemo might not be a master tactician, but he was intelligent and insightful and unusual. He employed rather unusual and frequently frowned upon tactics for a Hydra officer. Once she was done being debriefed, Yelena accessed what she could of Zemo's record. Then she sat back and thought for a bit. Zemo hadn't done anywhere near as much as his fellow officers. Notably, however, every single action he had taken had succeeded. Perhaps not on the first try, but in those cases he'd apparently done further information gathering and or sufficiently altered his tactics such that a second attempt succeeded. His opinion as to the serum was nigh on to heretical, which accounted for his relatively low position. It smacked of criticizing their founder, which wasn't tolerated. But Yelena had to admit that at least in theory he'd come up with an equally workable solution, though she wouldn't have a fully formed opinion about that until she saw the new asset in action. It said a lot for Zemo's style of leadership that he had arranged just such a showing. She was led to the lower levels in a hidden, heavily protected training room. This room is where X-23 was trained. She never faces live opponents. My father was unwilling to risk her corruption in the early stages, and we were never assigned a widow to work with. Once she was far enough in her training that corruption was no longer a serious concern.
What would you like me to do?
Yelena asked.
Yes, actually. Not today. I'd like you to do it twice. Once to see how her skills stack up to yours in a fight, and then, after she is properly prepared, to impress on her mind that she hasn't a hope of standing against you and must flee from you.
Zemo told her. Yelena nodded agreement immediately. A few moments later, the girl walked into the room. She resembled nothing so much as a predator. Widows learned to project that aura, but not all of them had learned to pull it off. Yelena, and the traitor, had, of course, so she recognized a well-done aura. The average person faced with this girl in hunting mode would be utterly terrified. The girl's fighting style was spare, efficiently lethal, in the least time and with the least amount of energy and effort expended possible. She never hesitated or slowed down. Not even a recording of someone begging for their life garnered any kind of reaction at all. Not quite a widow's education, but very close to it. Yelena had no problem mentally according the girl the honorary title. The programmed enemies dispatched, the girl immediately strode to the door, her expression blank, eyes straight forward. She marched through the door and disappeared. The next day, Zemo got Laura ready for her clash with Yelena. He did not hurry the programming process. Haste led to sloppiness. Sloppiness led to trouble, regardless of what you were being sloppy about. Still, it didn't take all that long to gas her and then interact with her as her benevolent, loving father to reinforce his preferred role in her mind. He then returned to the control booth, gassed her again, and began the process of turning her from Laura into X-23, the highly trained, thoroughly deadly Hydra assassin. The process was a bit more extensive than dealing with Laura. The room was fumigated and purged 5 times to ensure there was no trace of Zemo's scent anywhere in the room. The room itself was then changed from that of a small but nice apartment into that of a bare, metal-walled cell, whereupon the fumigation and purge process was repeated another 5 times to ensure no lingering outside scents that might cause problems. Only when this process was complete did he issue the commands that would effect the necessary mental change in the mutant. This he did through voice distortion technology that turned his voice from that of a man to that of a woman, and from the anonymity of the control booth, so she never got any true sensory data on her controller. When it came time to turn her to her Laura state, this process was reversed in its entirety, with the addition of the appropriate sense being pumped back into the apartment before Laura was allowed to wake, followed by a reinforcing visit from her doting father. That done, he retreated to the observation booth to watch the coming battle. X-23's first real test. The Zemo family's efforts, while thoroughly successful, hadn't quite managed to create the perfect mindless weapon. They had come unbelievably, uncomfortably close, but it wasn't perfect. In Laura's case, there wasn't even a spark of fight or will in her to subvert her training. All there was potential, and even then it was the potential inherent in a high-end healing factor. Those with high-end healing factors were resilient. Their bodies resisted damage to untold degrees and worked to undo it. And while the Zemos had been careful to avoid healable physical traumas where they could, under the right conditions, the mental conditioning could and would get shaken off with relative ease. All that was needed was opportunity. Logan had gone from feral, wild Hydra captive to a reasonably sane and decent human being in a matter of 2 years with no help. And Zemo would be sending his pet project into the very heart of the Avengers. But for now, that opportunity had not yet arrived, and Laura, or more properly in this mode, X-23, was as yet unaware there was even a problem where her situation was concerned. Right here and right now, X-23 was on the hunt. And for the first time, she had live prey. The Zemos had encouraged and facilitated the development of the feral tendencies X-23 had inherited from her sire, but they had been careful in their methods of development. Programmed to be on the hunt, X-23 was in the truest sense a predator with their attention fixed on suitable prey. There was only enough human-level intelligence to permit her to respond to her prey's attempts to evade her and successfully hunt them down. In true predator fashion, she dispatched her prey as swiftly and efficiently as possible. There was no joy or exultation in fighting a fellow predator, no grief or reluctance. A predator had no use for such emotions. X-23 merely struck when openings presented themselves and evaded the return strikes when it was possible to do so. When it was not, she neither flinched nor cried out at the pain. Only when the gas overwhelmed her did she stop. Yelena was impressed. The girl had held her own. Yelena suspected that if it had been permitted to go long enough, she would have eventually overwhelmed Yelena. Yelena knew the limits of the serum that flowed through her veins, and she suspected the girl's healing factor would outlast Yelena's ability to heal herself. Beyond being able to outlast an opponent thanks to the healing factor, the girl seemed to have every bit of the combat training the widows had gotten. All she lacked was the infiltration training to be a true widow. "She performs well," Yelena admitted. "There is no knowing if she can handle Hulk. No one with sufficient skills has gotten close enough to gauge the creature's durability. The humans, however, shouldn't be a problem if it comes to combat. Not even the rogue widow. That fight would take longer, but the rogue would eventually go down. The aliens are a wild card, but they have to sleep sometime, and then it's a simple matter of cutting their heads off. Not much lives through that." "And the mutants?" Zemo asked. "Weapon X will be a problem," Yelena admitted. "The others not so much. Again, they have to sleep sometime, and then it's a simple matter of cutting off their heads. Weapon X, on the other hand, has the training and healing factor to go toe-to-toe with her and probably to even defeat her. And she can't cut his head off. Your best bet is to make her as doe-eyed and helpless and inoffensive as you possibly can, so that combat becomes less likely. The more they think of her as a victim, the less inclined they'll be to suspect her of duplicity." "Thank you for your input. You've given me some valuable insights that will allow me to avoid a few problems I hadn't foreseen," Zemo said.